This is White Plains Week, the weekly roundup of White Plains, Westchester, and world news. With John Bailey, editor and publisher of the daily internet newspaper White Plains Citizen Net Reporter, WPCNR.com. Jim Benneroff, editor and publisher of SuburbanStreet.com and WhitePlains.com. And me, Peter Katz, formerly with NBC, ABC News, and stations from Boston to Los Angeles. White Plains Week, what's happening? Who are the newsmakers? What's in store for the future? The views and opinions expressed on this program are solely those of the participants. White Plains Week is presented on Optimum Cable Channel 76, Verizon Fios Channel 45, and on the internet at whiteplainsweek.com, youtube.com, and wpcommunitymedia.org. Now, White Plains Week.
Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. and Ms. Westchester, White Plains, and the world. John Bailey, the Citizen Net reporter, and Peter Katz, the anchor for all seasons with the City News Roundup show, recording on Inauguration Day 2017, when Donald J. Trump will be sworn in as the 45th President of the United States. We will have the final episode of our exclusive feature, Trump in Transition, and what a week it has been. And our partner, Jim Benneroff, is on very special assignment tonight. In the headlines this week, the January thaw arrived with a degree of calm and warmth. And this is Manor Park in Larchmont, where it was warm enough to forget the anxiety of the week. If we can, there we are. Very pretty. It belied the tumult to come in the last 3 days, right? Now, housing in Westchester, Rockland, and Putnam and Dutchess counties rebounded to the most sales in a year. Since 2011, Westchester sales were up 7.7%. County Executive Robert Astorino accused Governor Andrew Cuomo of spreading fake news on Indian Point in preview of things to come. Peter, you will have a look at this. And the Westchester County District Attorney charged a White Plains woman in the fatal accident at the end of October where 2 persons were killed. There was a bank robbery in White Plains late Thursday at the Capital One Bank on North Broadway at 4 p.m. in the afternoon. The robber, police said, passed a note demanding money. The robber wore black sunglasses with orange reflected lenses, black jacket, blue jeans, black sneakers. Call the White Plains Police if you have any information, 422-6111. Remember last week we talked about the legislative ban on gun shows they passed to ban them from county property? Well, this week, county legislator John Testa assured WPCNR the county executive Rob Astorino would veto that 9-8 passage today, Friday, and next week pass compromise legislation. Gun show at the county center will go on as scheduled January 21st. Berkshire Hathaway subsidiary acquired Houlihan Lawrence in Westchester. The city postponed a hearing on a proposal for a group home in Prospect Park. The most unforgettable week rolling up to an inauguration of a president in my memory, and we had one beautiful day of weather. But right now, Peter, it's time for the final episode.
No, we're going to take a look first
that's right,
the Indian Point controversy.
That's right, exactly.
And
I'm so confused.
Yeah, well, yeah, you had determined that was the shocker of the week, actually.
It was. It began that way.
County Executive Rob Astorino has gone into combat with Governor Cuomo and charged that some of the things that Cuomo said in the past couple of days were really fake news. Now, we've heard that term fake news before. What happened was that Cuomo first announced that he has a plan for kids to have free tuition.
Free tuition?
At SUNY facilities and the City University of New York facilities. And he said if your families earn less than $125,000 a year, that's the total income, then you can go to college for free. Okay. Then Astorino said at the Westchester County Association that not only was that announcement from Cuomo and the announcement from Cuomo that Indian Point would be closed, the nuclear power plant would be shut down, are fake news, but he gave the impression to many that maybe, just maybe, the campaign for governor is starting already.
Yeah, it's as if we haven't had enough campaigning.
What happened was that Astorino spoke at the Westchester County Association breakfast in Tarrytown. That was a few days ago. And he tore into Cuomo's plan for the free college tuition. And to quote Astorino, he said, "It doesn't get any more fake than that. Somebody has to pay, and the somebody has to be us." That's right. What Astorino said. Now, at the Westchester County Association breakfast, Astorino again slammed Cuomo on the deal to close Entergy's Indian Point nuclear power plant by 2021. His remarks echoed what he had said in a news conference with officials from various communities which will be affected by the plant's closure.
This deal lacked utter transparency that affects at least 1 million people in Westchester County and the surrounding counties, along with the almost 9 million residents of New York City. And yet, 3 people in a room, basically, the governor, the head of a power company, and Riverkeeper, got to cut a good deal for themselves, leaving the taxpayers and the ratepayers to hold the bag. And so the joke is on us, because rates will certainly go up and taxes will certainly go up to have to pay for this. You know, the economic costs for this are going to be staggering, no matter how you cut it. Now, the governor's going to say that everyone will be made whole somehow. But you think about this. What's going to happen is the loss of tax revenue is going to be made up by whom? Taxpayers, to bail out other taxpayers. It all comes from the same pocket, either from the state, from the county, somebody. And so this is, again, New York State chasing away a business that pays taxes so that taxpayers can end up footing the bill. And this state is so backwards, and unfortunately, we all have to make up the difference here. And that is sort of like why the last middle-class person in this state is going to turn off the lights, literally.
Now, also speaking was Cortland Town Supervisor Linda Puglisi, who seemed especially annoyed with the way the governor handled the announcement.
The safety of the plant has been my major concern for 26 years as the elected town supervisor. I've been at all of their public hearings, all of their conference calls, regardless of what the issue is. I want you to know, I receive a call 2, 3 in the morning if a nut, a bolt, or a paper clip falls on the ground. I did not receive any notification whatsoever from Entergy nor from the governor's office about the closure of this plant. It's outrageous. It is outrageous. We in Cortland have sat down in good faith in a confidential manner to negotiate and vote on 2 pilots. Entergy first bought these plants in the year 2000. Right away, they filed what's called a certiorari. We sat down. Right away, our town attorney, our controller, myself, negotiated with them in good faith and had a 10-year pilot to stabilize taxes for the county, the town, the village, school district, et al. And then we recently entered into a new pilot agreement, payment in lieu of taxes, voted on it in December of 2014. 8 more years to go. What happens to that pilot? Let me tell you, once the plant closes, I checked with my town attorney, the assessment drops significantly. Therefore, where do we get the revenue?
Now, it appears right now that the most severely impacted in terms of loss of tax revenue will be the Hendrick Hudson School District. Their superintendent, Joseph Hochreiter, said this.
When $23.3 million in revenue is taken from us, or $23.7 next year, which is 30% of our operating budget, our kids and our community and their property tax is at risk. And more importantly, their property value is at risk. What we know is the #1 indicator of property value is how well your schools perform. And I can tell you that if 30% of our revenue dries up, as proposed, we're going to have to make some very dangerous and very unfortunate decisions. But what our community should know is that as superintendent and our business official Enrique Catalan and our staff, we're going to work with the elected officials behind me. We're going to work with the county executive, with Linda Puglisi, and hope that the governor comes to the table with a plan. Because to strip any municipality, in particular a school district, educating 2,500 kids, to strip them of 30% of their budget has real consequences.
Now, keeping the Indian Point nuclear power plant open, according to many, would itself have real consequences, possibly for the environment, the risk of something going wrong, and the fact that a nuclear facility is positioned pretty much in the center of a major metropolitan area. It's just a few miles up the river from Manhattan, after all. And so there is some merit to the idea of closing Indian Point, no doubt about it. But what concerns these people, and even as we're recording it still has not been resolved, is the fact that this was handled by Governor Cuomo in almost isolation from those communities which would be directly involved in the closure, would be directly affected by it. And there are many questions which need to be answered, many issues which need to be resolved before the actual closing takes place. Even after the closing takes place, there will be other issues, some of them environmental, such as how will the nuclear waste be handled. Entergy says it's going to move from storage of the spent nuclear fuel rods in a pool underwater to what's called dry cask storage, where the rods are placed in casks and held in a facility such as would be constructed to hold them at Indian Point.
They're going to be there.
Or they could be shipped somewhere else,
Yeah.
out of state perhaps, to the west perhaps.
Perhaps on a truck that could jackknife, who knows?
But there are plenty of, the old saying, the devil is in the details.
But we don't get the details.
That really applies, and I think that's a lot of what has put so many local political noses out of joint here, was that indeed they did not get the details. This came as a bit of a surprise. The first real indication we had that something as monumental as this was going to be announced was a couple of days before Cuomo's announcement, when somehow the New York Times got wind that something was up regarding
Somehow, it's amazing.
Indian
How
Point.
intrepid is that organization?
Yeah.
Right. But anyway, Peter, in another matter, the Westchester District Attorney, Anthony A. Scarpino Jr., announced that Michelle Bonet of 9 Stonewall Circle, White Plains, was arraigned on an indictment this week on 3 counts of aggravated vehicular homicide, 2 counts of manslaughter in the 2nd degree, 1 count of aggravated driving while intoxicated, 1 count of driving while intoxicated, and 1 count of driving while ability impaired by the influence of drugs or of alcohol, in the deaths of Henrietta and Carmelo Sabezzi on 2:15 p.m. October 28th. She drove across the center lane and collided head-on, killing the couple in that car. And it's another indication of 3 lives ruined. 2 ended and 1 really facing a really terrible future too.
Of course, we need to point out that an indictment is not a trial nor a conviction, and so justice
charged. Right.
The justice system must run its course here.
As does the presidency.
Oh,
And
indeed,
Peter
does it ever.
Katz has the
Final
edition.
transition final edition of Trump and Transition.
Right.
That's a feature we've been doing during the transition portion. As we are recording this on Friday morning, January 20th, 2017, the inauguration in Washington is underway. But a lot has happened leading up to this date, so we're going to run through that, then we'll tell you what we do know about what's going on in Washington as we're recording this program. During a luncheon in Washington yesterday, President Trump appeared. He congratulated many of his supporters, his cabinet nominees, such as the controversial Attorney General nominee Jeff Sessions, who was there, who Trump introduced as, quote, the great Jeff Sessions. Those watching on television were suddenly greeted with a picture of the floor and feet, because it seems the Trump people kicked all the reporters and cameras out of the room. In an effort to discuss journalistic access to the Trump administration, the Radio Television Digital News Association, which used to be called the Radio Television News Directors Association, and 60 other journalism organizations have requested a meeting with President-elect Trump and Vice President-elect Pence, who by the time they meet are going to be President Trump and Vice President Pence. They have announced this coalition because they are concerned about the ability of reporters to directly interact with government employees under a Trump administration. They are concerned about access to the president and to the White House. They want to ensure that the Freedom of Information Act remains as strong as possible. Anticipating potential changes in federal immigration enforcement practices and priorities, New York State Attorney General Eric Schneiderman has provided local governments and law enforcement agencies with a legal roadmap for improving public safety by protecting vulnerable immigrant communities. As part of that, Schneiderman provided the local municipalities with model laws and policies which they could implement, which would make it easier for them to legally avoid cooperating with federal agencies seeking to round up immigrants. Here in White Plains,
The immigrant roundup.
White Plains Mayor Tom Roach reacted to what Schneiderman put out by saying, quote, I applaud the efforts of Attorney General Schneiderman and thank him for his leadership on this important issue. White Plains is a vibrant and diverse city which also has a strong sense of community. And he said, as part of our community policing practices, the city of White Plains already follows the principles outlined by the Attorney General. In other words, Roach is saying White Plains police will not play the role of federal roundup officers against immigrants. On Capitol Hill, some of Trump's cabinet picks had Senate committee hearings on their nominations. Oklahoma Attorney General Scott Pruitt, who was nominated to become head of the Environmental Protection Agency, was accused of being more interested in protecting oil and gas companies than protecting the environment. Sonny Perdue has been named as Agriculture Secretary.
Is that the chicken guy?
Don't know.
Don't know.
Don't know
The same
exactly
sounds
who he
familiar.
is.
Right.
The name is familiar,
Yes,
that's
right.
for sure. It's interesting to note there are no Hispanics or Latinos in Trump's cabinet. The only black in Trump's cabinet is Ben Carson. Georgia Congressman Tom Price, Trump's pick to run the Department of Health and Human Services, admitted during the hearing that while he was a congressman, he bought the stock of a medical device manufacturer and other medical companies and then pushed legislation which helped those companies and drove the stock prices up. He also admitted to getting an inside stock position in one company at a discounted price about a week before he introduced legislation which benefited that company. Price, as you know, wants to do away with Medicare and Medicaid as we know it. He was taken to task by Senator Bernie Sanders for saying that Price, wants everyone to have access to health care. Sanders explained to Price that having access to something isn't the same thing as actually having it.
Very subtle.
And just because someone has access to buy something doesn't mean they can afford to do it.
I have access to a lot, but I can't afford it.
South Carolina Congressman Rick Mulvaney, Trump's pick to run the White House Office of Management and Budget, admitted under oath that he had not paid $15,000 in federal employment taxes for workers he had employed in his household. Senator Chuck Schumer
The nanny
noted-
trap.
Senator Chuck Schumer noted that Republicans disqualified Democratic Senator Tom Daschle from holding a cabinet position in the Obama administration when it was discovered that he had done the same thing. Schumer said, "What's good for the goose should be good for the gander."
The facts are very annoying.
Betsy DeVos took quite a bit of fire during her hearing to become Secretary of Education. She's a big promoter of not-for-profit charter schools and the defunding of public schools. The nominee for Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, was grilled about the time during the financial crisis when he took over a bank and restructured it. Part of that restructuring involved foreclosing and taking away the houses of about 35,000 families. Mnuchin admitted under questioning that some of them were military families who were actively serving the country when his bank grabbed their houses. Democratic senators arranged for several of the people the bank had foreclosed upon to appear at a Capitol Hill fundraising discussion before the day of the hearing. Mnuchin eventually sold his bank for $3.2 billion. There was an inaugural concert last night at the Lincoln Memorial. From what I could see on television, it was mostly country and Western music, interspersed with some John Philip Sousa marches. From the pictures, it looked as if there were about 25,000 people there, but it was hard to tell because the audience area was not fully lighted. Trump and his family watched from behind bulletproof glass. Trump and Pence earlier yesterday laid a wreath at the Tomb of the Unknown in Arlington National Cemetery. This morning, downtown Washington streets have been essentially on lockdown, traffic banned, barriers up along sidewalks. National Guard troops were sworn in yesterday as auxiliary metro policemen in Washington. Usual airspace restrictions over Washington have doubled in size. Last night here in New York area, in front of Trump Tower, a demonstration, several thousand people, celebrities on hand, such as Cher, the documentary producer Michael Moore was there. New York Times reports a Russian connection. They report that there is an investigation going on right now. The FBI is one of several federal agencies doing the investigation, trying to see whether there was a tie-in between Paul Manafort and others involved in the Trump campaign and the Russians. According to the Times story, there is a money trail that the investigators are following from Russia to the Trump campaign.
A ruble trail.
Could be. According to a source, Trump has not been able to yet fill many of the jobs that will need to be filled as presidential appointments in order for his administration to function. At the Labor Department, it is said that 600 people are gone. And the 600 appointments have not been made. There are empty desks, apparently, in several agencies in Washington.
You could fill them with the illegal immigrants.
It is said
around
that the presidential appointments consist of approximately 4,000 top-level positions. The administration, the new administration, apparently will have plans to put forward to eliminate the National Endowment for the Arts, to eliminate funding for the public broadcasting system. A CBS News poll released last night shows a 32% approval rating for Trump as he takes office. That's the lowest in history, supposedly.
But it doesn't matter.
President Obama took office with a 78% approval rating. Now, the Trump people had been giving away free tickets to the inaugural festivities online, and they also, when you try to get your free tickets, try to sell you this. It is a license plate. A Trump commemorative license plate could be yours for only $50.
Right. And you can also buy a commemorative coin for $14.
At the White House this morning, Vice President Biden and his wife greeted Vice President-elect Pence and his wife. And then the next motorcade appeared, and President Obama and Michelle Obama greeted Donald Trump and his wife Melania. They walked up the stairs, It was a very friendly moment. You see that blue box in Melania's hand on the left there? That was a gift from Tiffany's, which she presented to Michelle Obama. And then the Obamas and the Trumps went inside the White House, and we got set for what was the tradition of the outgoing president, Barack Obama, riding in the limousine with the incoming president, Donald Trump, up to the Capitol for the swearing-in ceremony. And as we are recording this program, that ceremony at the Capitol is beginning. The crowd is estimated to be somewhere between 700,000 and 900,000 people, which is about half of what it was when Barack Obama first took office. But nonetheless,
the security is really tight, though.
But
so
nonetheless, a good-sized crowd.
Right.
We do not know what Trump's inaugural address is going to be like. We have been given a hint that it will be fairly short, and we have also been given a hint that it will be conciliatory, an attempt to bring the nation together after what was
Well, the day has started very
extraordinarily
nicely.
divisive.
You know, the day has started nicely with those families before the White House. Always a touching moment.
You know, it has, John, and you know on this program, if you've been watching for any length of time, that a regular feature here is the shocker of the week. To some people, what's happening today in Washington is the shocker of a lifetime.
Could very well be, but
There are
we have
others
to see.
who welcome it, who welcome the opportunity for, as Trump campaigned, to drain the swamp.
Right.
However, there are others who say that he's really just putting more alligators and poisonous snakes in the swamp with some of his appointees.
Quickly now, if we could have the housing slide back, just want to relate this to everybody. The week started with good news. Sales were up 24% in the region. Westchester was up 7.7%. But unfortunately, the sales prices that they're selling for have not been going up substantially. $818,000 for a single-family home in Westchester. Condos, the average price $424,000. Co-ops, $155,000. But the increases in pricing are just not there, and that's laid to inventory being too low.
On the other
down.
hand, there was a major earthquake in the real estate business in Westchester County just a couple of days ago when a subsidiary of Warren Buffett's company, Berkshire Hathaway, announced that they are acquiring Houlihan Lawrence. Now, that's a very, very
really
large
shoehorning into the Westchester
here in
market in a
Westchester.
big way. Oh, and in the gun legislation matter we spoke to you about last week, it was learned from John Testa this week by myself that there is going to be a veto coming down sometime this Friday of the gun ban, and they expect to pass compromise legislation next Tuesday. However, the veto will not, their override of the veto is going to be held open all year.
So apparently they don't have the votes to override Astorino's veto of this legislation. They passed the gun show at the county center. Tomorrow, Saturday, will take place as scheduled.
Okay. John Bailey, Peter Katz, good night for White Plains Week.
This has been White Plains Week, news and commentary about White Plains, Westchester, and the world. The views and opinions expressed on this program were solely those of the participants. White Plains Week, produced by White Plains Citizen Net Reporter and presented on Optimum Cable Channel 76 and Verizon Fios Channel 45. You may view White Plains Week anytime on the internet at whiteplainsweek.com, youtube.com, and wpcommunitymedia.org. For White Plains Week, this is Peter Katz speaking.